It happened on an ordinary evening, or at least it started out that way. The dinner table was set, the food steaming, the clinking of silverware echoing against the silence of a family that didn't talk much anymore. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, pretending not to notice the sharp glances exchanged between my father and brother. Then it happened. My dad, with his usual stern face, set down his fork, looked directly at me, and said in a voice so calm it was almost cruel, "You're not part of this family." For a second, I thought I misheard him. Surely he didn't just say that. Surely, after everything, after years of me trying so hard to be the good daughter, the obedient one, the one who never caused problems, he didn't mean that. But then I saw it in his eyes. Cold, final, like a door had just slammed shut. The air in the room froze. My mom's hand hovered in the air with her glass of water, but she didn't say anything. She didn't defend me. She just lowered her eyes to her plate, like it was safer not to exist. My brother, oh, he didn't even try to hide his smirk. It was the kind of smirk that said, "I knew this day would come." And me? I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. My face burned, my hands trembled under the table, but I didn't let a single tear fall. I wanted to scream, to throw the plate across the room, to demand how he could erase me so easily. His daughter, his own blood. But the words caught in my throat, suffocating me like smoke. Instead, I stayed quiet. I don't even know why. Maybe because I realized in that moment, no amount of begging, no amount of explaining, would change what he had decided. I wasn't one of them, not in his eyes. And if my mom's silence, my brother's smug grin, meant anything, maybe they agreed with him. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until the sound of the clock ticking on the wall was unbearable. Finally, I pushed back my chair, slowly, deliberately. My legs felt like they would give out, but I forced myself to stand tall. No one said a word, not even my mom. I walked away from the table, each step echoing in my ears like a drumbeat, a reminder that something inside me had just broken. That night, lying in my bed, I replayed it over and over again. Those 6 words, "You're not part of this family," over and over, until they carved themselves into me like scars. But here's the thing about scars. They don't just mark you. They remind you. They change you. And while I cried silently into my pillow, a different part of me, a quieter, colder part, began to whisper, "If I'm not part of this family, then maybe it's time they find out what that really means." The days that followed were a blur of silence. Not the comforting kind, but the heavy, suffocating kind that hangs over you like a storm cloud. I avoided the kitchen. I avoided the living room. I avoided my father's eyes. At meals, no one mentioned what he had said that night. My mom acted as though nothing had happened, moving around the house with her quiet efficiency, pretending the cracks in the walls weren't spreading wider each day. My brother, however, seemed to thrive on it. Every time he walked past me, there was that smirk again, the one that said, "You don't belong here, and we all know it." But what cut the deepest wasn't their cruelty. It was their indifference. Not once did anyone knock on my door to ask if I was okay. Not once did my mom come to sit by me and whisper, "Don't listen to him. You're my daughter, and nothing will change that." Nothing, just silence. So I stayed in my room, staring at the ceiling for hours, listening to the muffled sounds of a family I was apparently no longer part of. Every laugh from the living room, every clink of dishes, every creak of the stairs reminded me of the invisible wall between us. And yet, as painful as it was, the silence gave me something unexpected: clarity. I realized I had been chasing their approval for years. Every achievement, every sacrifice, every forced smile at family gatherings, all of it was me trying to prove I was worthy of love. But the truth was right in front of me now. No matter what I did, it would never be enough. That thought should have destroyed me. But instead, it sparked something, a quiet strength. I began to understand that if they didn't see me as part of this family, maybe it wasn't me who was losing something. Maybe it was them. And deep down, a plan began to form. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew one thing. They would soon understand the weight of their words. It started with a simple thought. Lying awake in the dark, I replayed my father's words over and over again. You're not part of this family. At first, the words stabbed like knives, but the more I repeated them in my head, the less power they had. If I wasn't part of this family, then what was I? I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn a place at their table, the birthdays I organized, the holidays I helped prepare, the times I quietly gave up what I wanted so someone else could shine. They had taken and taken, without once stopping to appreciate that I was the glue holding things together. And that's when it hit me. Maybe it was time to stop giving. The next morning, while the house still slept, I sat at my desk with a cup of cold coffee and a pen. At first, I didn't know what I was writing. It began as a letter to myself, raw, messy, and full of questions I had never dared ask. Why am I begging for love? Why do I let them treat me like this? What happens if I stop trying? But as the words filled the page, something shifted. The letter wasn't just for me anymore. It was for them, for my father, for my mother, for every relative who had looked the other way, while I was made to feel like an outsider in my own home. This wouldn't be a rant or a scream on paper. It would be calm, sharp, the kind of truth you can't argue with because it cuts too deep. By the time the sun rose, I had 3 pages written. My hand ached, but my heart felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't crying over their rejection. I was channeling it, turning their cruelty into something they couldn't ignore. I folded the pages neatly and slid them into an envelope. I didn't write their names on it yet. I wasn't ready. But I knew one thing. When they finally read these words, they would see me in a way they never had before. And maybe, just maybe, they'd regret everything. The letter sat on my desk for 2 days, sealed in its plain white envelope. Every time I passed by, my eyes lingered on it, my chest tightening with a mixture of fear and anticipation. But I knew it wasn't finished. Not yet. My father was a man who dismissed emotions. If I cried, he rolled his eyes. If I argued, he silenced me with a glare. Words from the heart would never be enough, not for him. So I decided to add something he couldn't wave away. Proof. I opened an old box I had kept hidden under my bed for years. Inside were fragments of my life that no one else had cared to remember. Photos where I had been cropped out, report cards I had proudly shown but that were tossed aside, birthday cards I had made for family members, folded neatly with thank yous that were never returned. And then, the most painful discovery, a printed email I had saved from years ago, where my father had written to my mother, "She'll never amount to anything. Don't waste your energy on her." I had kept it all, not because I wanted to, but because a part of me had always known that someday I would need to prove I wasn't imagining their cruelty. One by one, I organized the pieces. I clipped the email to the back of my letter. I tucked in the photo where my sister stood proudly in front of the Christmas tree, while I had been blurred in the corner, almost erased. I added the report card with the words, "Excellent work," scrawled in red ink, proof of an achievement my father had never acknowledged. By the time I was done, the envelope had grown heavy. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was years of silence, of rejection, of me carrying the weight of their disdain. As I held it in my hands, my resolve hardened. This wasn't about begging them to love me anymore. It was about making them see what they had done and forcing them to confront the truth they had ignored for so long. I placed the envelope in my bag. My fingers trembled, but my heart beat steady. The next question wasn't if I would deliver it. It was how and when. I knew timing was everything. If I simply mailed the letter, my father could toss it in the trash without even opening it. If I handed it to him face to face, he might rip it apart before reading a single line. No. If this was going to matter, if this was going to shake him, I needed to deliver it when his guard was down. That moment came sooner than I expected. A week later, my family was gathering at my parents' house for Sunday lunch. It was a tradition I rarely attended anymore, but this time, I made sure to be there. When I walked in, I could already feel the tension. My father barely glanced at me. My stepmother offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. My siblings acted as though I were invisible. I sat quietly, eating in silence, watching them chatter and laugh like I wasn't even at the table. The familiar sting burned in my chest, but instead of shrinking back, I focused on the envelope hidden in my bag. When the meal was over, everyone drifted toward the living room. My father sat in his favorite chair, scrolling through his phone, while the others argued about which movie to watch. No one paid attention to me. It was the perfect moment. I stood, walked over, and placed the thick envelope right on the coffee table in front of him. He didn't look up. "You'll want to read this," I said softly. My voice didn't shake. For the first time in years, I felt steady, almost powerful. Then I left. I didn't wait for his reaction. I didn't explain myself. I didn't give him the chance to throw his dismissive words at me again. I simply walked out the door, my footsteps echoing down the hallway. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling. My heart pounded so hard, it felt like it might break my ribs. But underneath the fear was something else. Relief. The letter was no longer mine to carry. The weight had shifted. That night, as I lay awake in bed, my phone silent beside me, I imagined my father finally opening the envelope. I pictured his frown deepening as he read my words, his hands tightening around the papers as the photos and proof spilled into his lap. He had always been in control, but not this time. This time, I had the power. I didn't know exactly when my father would read it. Maybe that night, maybe the next morning. But I knew him well enough to guess he wouldn't ignore it. He hated mysteries, hated not being in control. That envelope would burn a hole in his mind until he tore it open. And he did. I wasn't there in person, but later I pieced it together from the fallout. My stepmother told one of my cousins, and eventually it got back to me. It happened late that same evening. The house was quiet, my siblings were upstairs, and my stepmother was folding laundry in the bedroom. My father sat alone in his chair, the unopened envelope still sitting on the coffee table where I had left it. He had been pretending all day that it didn't bother him, scrolling through his phone, making small talk. But the way he kept glancing at it, the way his jaw clenched tighter every time, betrayed the truth. Finally, he broke. He ripped it open. At first, he probably expected some pathetic plea for forgiveness, a childish attempt to win back his approval. But as he pulled out the stack of papers, his expression changed. The first page was the letter, my words, carefully chosen, sharp enough to cut through years of his cruelty. I told him I remembered everything, every insult, every dismissal, every moment he made me feel like I didn't belong. I reminded him of his own words, "You're not part of this family." And then I explained why I had gathered the proof. The next pages contained exactly that. Bank statements, copies of old documents, photos he thought were long forgotten, things he had hidden, things that, if exposed, could ruin the flawless image he clung to so desperately. As he read, his face reportedly went pale. He kept flipping the pages, faster and faster, as if hoping it wasn't as bad as it looked. But it was. Every detail laid out, every lie documented. By the time he reached the end, he wasn't angry. Not yet. He was silent, frozen, the kind of silence that filled the room like a storm waiting to break. And then, for the first time in years, my stepmother heard something she hadn't expected from him. A whisper. "She knows." Those two words changed everything. The next morning, the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. My father tried to act normal, but the people closest to him could see something was wrong. He didn't storm into the kitchen with his usual commanding presence. He didn't bark orders at my siblings or make cutting remarks about my stepmother's cooking. Instead, he was quiet. Too quiet. My siblings noticed it first. At breakfast, they whispered to each other when he barely touched his food. Normally, he would be lecturing them about responsibility, about grades, about how they would never make it if they weren't tougher. But that day, he just sat there, staring at his coffee like it might give him answers. My stepmother tried to brush it off, pretending everything was fine. But I know she was scared. She had lived with his temper long enough to recognize the signs of something simmering beneath the surface, and then it began to show. By midday, he had snapped at her twice over nothing. Once about a misplaced phone charger, and once because she asked him if he was feeling all right. His anger wasn't controlled or deliberate this time. It was jagged, panicked, the kind of anger that comes from fear. That evening, the real cracks started to show. He disappeared into his office after dinner and didn't come out for hours. My stepmother said she could hear drawers opening and closing, papers shuffling, the heavy sound of him pacing back and forth. She knew better than to interrupt, but when he finally emerged, he looked different. His face was pale, his shirt clung with sweat, and his eyes darted around like a man trapped in his own house. My siblings asked if he was okay, and he snapped at them to mind their business. Later that night, my stepmother caught him shredding papers in the garage. He jumped when he saw her, like a child caught stealing candy, then forced a laugh and said it was old junk. But she noticed the way his hands shook. That was when she knew. He was hiding something. And though my family didn't know what I had done yet, the atmosphere had shifted. They could feel it, even if they didn't understand it. Something invisible was pressing down on the house, tightening like a noose, because deep down, he knew I wasn't bluffing. And soon, they would all know too. The following days felt like living in the eye of a storm. My father walked around the house like a man carrying a secret weight no one else could see. He tried to keep his usual composure, but cracks kept splitting through his mask, and soon everyone in the family noticed. It started small. My younger brother asked him a simple question about borrowing the car, and instead of answering calmly, my father snapped, "Do I look like I have time for your nonsense?" His voice shook as though the words had been ripped out of him. Then my sister asked why he wasn't going to work as often. Normally, he would have bragged about his important responsibilities, or how he was too valuable to be questioned. But instead, he froze. His fork clattered against his plate, and for a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. Then, in a low growl, he muttered, "Mind your own business." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even my stepmother began pressing him, though she chose her words carefully, almost timidly. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, she cornered him in the kitchen and asked, "What's going on? You're not yourself. Are we in trouble?" He slammed the fridge door shut, making her flinch. "There's nothing wrong. Don't start with your paranoia." Seh. But the way his hands trembled as he poured himself a glass of water betrayed him. The children weren't blind. They whispered among themselves in the hallway, in the living room, anywhere they thought he couldn't hear. Did Dad lose his job? Is he sick? Why is he shredding papers at night? And then came the moment he couldn't deflect. At dinner, my brother blurted out, "Mom, is Dad hiding something from us?" The table froze. My father's fork scraped harshly against his plate, his jaw tightening as he glared at everyone like they had betrayed him just by asking. "No one in this house hides anything from anyone," he barked, his voice shaking with more than anger. It was fear, pure, unmistakable fear. But that declaration did the opposite of what he wanted. Instead of silencing the family, it planted more doubt. My siblings exchanged uneasy glances. My stepmother's eyes darkened with suspicion. And though no one said it aloud, they all began to wonder the same thing. What was he so desperate to keep from them? The questions kept multiplying, but the answers never came, because only I had them. And soon, I was going to make sure the entire family knew the truth. By the end of that week, my father was no longer the man anyone recognized. He snapped at shadows, shouted over the smallest mistakes, and avoided making eye contact with anyone in the house. He walked with his shoulders hunched, as if he were constantly bracing for a blow no one else could see. But the problem with fear is that it doesn't stay hidden forever. It leaks out, poisoning everything around it. One evening, my stepmother found him in the study, shredding paper after paper, his face damp with sweat. When she asked what he was doing, he spun around, eyes wild, and barked, "Don't touch anything in here!" The way his voice cracked silenced her instantly, but later that night I overheard her crying quietly in her room. My siblings weren't any calmer. They had started avoiding him altogether, tiptoeing around the house like mice trying to escape a cat. My brother whispered to me once in the hallway, "It's like he's hiding from himself." He wasn't wrong. Then came the breaking point. It was Saturday morning. My father gathered everyone in the living room with a sharp command that left no room for refusal. We sat on the couches, the silence so heavy I could hear my sister's nervous breathing. He stood in the center of the room, holding a glass of water, but his hand trembled so badly it spilled onto the carpet. "Listen to me," he started, his voice unsteady. "There are things you don't understand, things that don't concern you. But I need you all to stop asking questions. Do you hear me? Stop asking. You'll only make it worse." My stepmother's voice was small but firm. "Worse for who?" The air froze. My father's eyes darted toward her, then to the rest of us. His lips opened, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, he looked powerless. That was when my sister, with tears brimming in her eyes, whispered the words that shattered what little control he had left. "Dad! Are we in danger?" He slammed the glass down on the table, shattering it into sharp fragments. Everyone flinched, his face twisted with rage and panic. But beneath it, there was something else too: shame. He turned away from us, gripping the edge of the table, his shoulders heaving with uneven breaths. "No one here is in danger," he hissed, "as long as you all keep your mouths shut." But it was too late. The silence that followed was worse than any argument, because in that silence, everyone knew whatever he was hiding was about to consume all of us, and I was the only one who held the match that could set the whole truth on fire. The morning it happened was strangely calm. No arguments, no shattered glasses, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. But the tension in the house clung to the air like smoke-thick, suffocating, impossible to escape. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, when I heard the mailbox clang shut. My father shuffled past me to the door, his face pale from another sleepless night. He didn't look at me as he bent down, picked up the stack of envelopes, and began flipping through them. Then he froze. One envelope stood out from the rest. White. Heavy paper, no return address. My father's hand trembled as he held it. I could see the color draining from his face before he even tore it open. He ripped it clumsily, pulling out the folded letter inside. His eyes darted across the words. At first, his jaw clenched. Then his breathing quickened. Finally, he staggered back, as if the paper itself had punched him in the chest. The room went silent. Everyone gathered my stepmother, my siblings, drawn in by the change in his face. My brother asked softly, "Dad, what is it?" But my father didn't answer. He couldn't. He simply stared at the page, his lips moving silently over the words. I knew what he was reading. I knew because I had written it. The letter was short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. "For years, you've told me I don't belong, that I'm not part of this family. You've tried to bury the truth, But I've kept every piece of evidence, every record, every photo you thought was gone. I've sent copies to people who will never let this disappear. You can't silence me anymore. The next step is in your hands. Your daughter. His hand shook so violently that the letter slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. My stepmother picked it up, her eyes scanning the words. She gasped, then covered her mouth with her hand. My siblings leaned forward, confusion and fear spreading across their faces. "What truth?" my sister asked, her voice trembling. "Dad, what is she talking about?" My father collapsed into the armchair, burying his face in his hands. For the first time in my life, he looked defeated. Not angry, not intimidating, just broken. I stood in the doorway, silent, watching. I didn't need to say anything. The letter spoke louder than I ever could. Finally, he whispered, barely audible, "She knows. She knows everything." The room erupted questions, accusations, desperate pleas, but I didn't stay to hear the rest. I picked up my bag, walked out the front door, and let it slam shut behind me. As I stepped into the crisp morning air, my phone buzzed. A notification lit up the screen. One of the people I'd sent the evidence to had just confirmed receipt. For the first time in years, I smiled. He had said I wasn't part of this family, but now it was clear. I didn't need to be, because I had something stronger than their approval. I had the truth. And the truth, once set free, cannot be buried again.